It took him 10 years of practice and putting together beats to become basically an overnight success. And, how he focused on the process of creating music versus the outcome. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to episode 50, part 2 on the Formula Podcast. I'm your host, Trevor Carlson, and on the Formula, we break down and explore the elements of health, wealth, happiness, and achievement with guests from all over the world. I'm really excited to just have spent the last 50 episodes with you guys and have you listen, and hopefully you had some takeaways that maybe you could apply to your own life in a way that helps you to achieve your goals, whether that's starting a business, getting in shape, traveling the world, writing a song, learning to play an instrument, whatever that may be. So on this episode, I'm going to do something a little bit differently. I'm going to go back and kind of recap some of the lessons I learned from our previous guests. And I guess just to kick things off, when I first started this show, I was really thinking about I just wanted to meet interesting people and hear their stories, and that has really developed into me figuring out what things, what habits, routines, experiences have led into the success that these people see today, and trying to figure out what the commonalities are, what do they have in common. And I think about my own experiences and where some of the most difficult or challenging times were, whether it's been running a experiment to start a startup to see if it's something that can get some legs right away, to failed relationships, to failed diets, failed workout routines, whatever it is. And then looking at how these other people have also gone through similar things, whether that's, I think Ira Wolf shared when she was first starting to play music and play different shows, how she got some negative feedback from members of the audience, and it was really hard. But the biggest lesson that I think she learned was learning to push through, to understand that it's okay to not be the best right away. And like Scotty Russell says, you can't be pizza. Not everyone's going to love you. Taking those lessons into consideration, I put together a list of 49 different lessons that I learned from each of the episodes after I went back and listened to them. So hopefully you gain a little bit of value out of this, and I would love it if you actually took the time to share with me the lessons that you learned from the episodes that you listened to. If you want to shoot those over to me either on Facebook at the Formula Podcast, or go ahead and email me, trevor@theformulapodcast.com. I would love to hear them, and it always makes me feel pretty good when I hear from guests that have listened to the show and the show has had some type of impact on their life, even if it was just them taking a small trip or going to the gym one extra day this week. Whatever it is, I'd love to hear it. So without me rambling on any further, let's get this episode started with me sharing some of the lessons I've learned from episode 2 all the way to recently episode 50 with David Gold. Episode 1 was with Fark.com founder and a good friend of mine and mentor, Drew Curtis. So this was really my first foray into interviewing someone, and it was fascinating going back and listening to this and seeing how far I've come as an interviewer, but also listening to the lessons that Drew shared. Now, Fark.com has been around for 18, 19 years now, something like that, and has been one of the largest online communities for that time. So Drew really has a wide variety of experience, and his success speaks for itself. Fark.com's success has really also paved the way for other internet startups like Reddit to really apply the same type of model and grow their audience from there. So the lesson that I learned from the episode with Drew was, eventually you're going to have to take a leap before your business is ready to support you. So this was interesting to me because, there's always that moment where you're working on a project or a business and you're bringing in some money and you're like, okay, when is the right time for me to quit my job or give up my income or whatever it is to really dive into this. And the lesson that your business is not going to be ready to support you when you need to take the leap, like it's scary as hell, right? Like, think about that. Like, you're not going to make enough at first when you take the leap, but the only way your business will ever get to that next level where it can sustain you is when you do.
2.
The next guest following up after Drew was Swine Tech CEO Matthew Rhoda. Matt's been a friend of mine since we both went through the Iowa Startup Accelerator a few years ago, and he's won, I don't know, as many awards as I've ever heard anybody else win at his age, and he's just been doing an awesome job as the CEO of his company. Now, when he stopped by, we really talked about his experience and pitching your business, because that's really where a lot of his success has come from, is his ability to communicate well what their business does, how and why, and tying his personal story to it. So the biggest takeaway that I had from this episode was your story and your ability to get people to care is going to really win people over and convince them to support you and follow you. So that means whether it's me podcasting, or it's you running your startup, or it's you in your sales role, your ability to communicate your story and why you're doing it and how it impacts them or your product is going to really be the difference between you seeing some success or massive success. So the question that I have asked myself, and I'll ask you as well, is how can you communicate your personal, very specific story to your audience, whoever that might be, to get them to support you or buy your product, right? So for me with the Formula Podcast, it's the difference between saying like, oh yeah, I started a podcast because I'm curious about people's habits, routines, and experiences that led them to who they are today, to really almost sharing my story instead, which is like, I spent a lot of my 20s trying to get different startups off the ground, trying to get into shape, trying to do a lot of different things, and failing a lot miserably, right? And that goes personal relationships too. Failed in several of those, and I really wanted to understand how people who were able to achieve success consistently, continually, over and over again, in whatever field that might be, what do they do? What do they do that sets them apart from everyone else? And then how can I look at those people and compare them side by side and understand what the factors are that have contributed to their success across different fields, and to see if there's a quote unquote a formula for achieving these things, whether it's happiness, which can mean relationships, travel, whatever that might be for you, wealth, that might be starting a startup, that might be investing money, it could be all sorts of things. Achievement, which we've had some athletes on that have done exceptional things, like Andy Anderson climbing Mount Everest, Dan Gable, one of the greatest Olympians of all time. What things do they have in common with musicians like Anthony D'Amato or Ira Wolf or Moods? And how do they impact a normal person's life? Like, how can a normal person take the lessons from these people and apply them to their day-to-day? So that's really my story behind the podcast and why I wanted to do this. And I hope that you as a listener can take something away from each episode and be able to apply it to your life.
4.
Episode number 4 was with my friend and college classmate, Michael Caraway. So in Michael's episode, we talk a lot about his experiences running a business as an early 20-something-year-old. And it actually kind of took a little twist into him sharing his experiences with with depression. So that was unexpected for me. I always thought Michael was like a really happy-go-lucky guy, very friendly, and so it was surprising. So the biggest takeaway from episode number 4 was that it's not always apparent who is suffering and how. So take the time to show compassion. It's so important. Like, you don't know what that person is going through. You don't know what their life has been like. So just be kind. God, what's the movie? Wonder. I watched the movie, and I'm reading the book now. I might have ugly cried during the movie, but don't tell anyone. Uh, so there's a quote in the movie that it's like I'm going to butcher this, so I'll throw it in the show notes for later on for anybody who would like to check it out. But it's, when given the choice between being right or being kind, choose kind. Like I said, you never really know what someone else is going through or has gone through, and it never hurts to be a little more warm or kind to people. I know it's never really hurt me in any way, just, smiling at someone, treating them well, going out of your way to give someone a hand when they need it. So remember that the next time you are given the choice. And again, when given the choice between being right or being kind, choose kind.
5.
Episode number 5 was with a friend of mine and mentor, Michael Finley, also known as the Crazy Man in the Pink Wig. This was an interesting episode for me because I know a lot about Mike. I've read his books. I've studied his philosophy on financial literacy. And really, the one thing that stood out to me in this episode was, anyone can achieve financial freedom with the right decisions, and it's easier than you think. The industry is really built on you not understanding how money works, or what the terminology is, or what to invest in, or where to put your money. And the way Mike talks about it, and the way that he breaks it down in his books, is that it's easier than you think, and once you learn it, you're empowered for the rest of your life to make smart financial decisions for you. And this can be applied to probably a lot of other areas of life as well, where you're only a few pieces of information away from making the right decisions to help you build the future that you want. So think about that the next time you struggle with the concept, or you're not sure what you should do next, or where you should invest, or how to work out, whatever that may be. So you're only a couple steps away from making the right decisions and changing your future.
6.
Episode number 6 is with my guy, Peter Awad. He is formerly the host of the Slow Hustle podcast and co-founder of Mission Meats. So Peter took his family on a crazy trip a couple years back, where him and his wife and their, I believe, 4 kids went and traveled the U.S., staying in one city at a time for about a month. And man, I don't know how he did that. That just seems crazy to me. Doing it solo or with a significant other seems like it'd have a lot of challenges, but having a whole family to take care of along the way, and running a company plus hosting a podcast is it's awesome, and hats off to Peter for being able to pull that off. So the biggest takeaway I learned from this episode was new experiences and intentional time allows you to live a life full of meaningful moments and memories with people that you care about the most. So one of the reasons behind him traveling taking his family on this trip was he wanted to slow down time. He would turn around and one of his kids was, 3 inches taller or 3 years older. And he really wanted to remember them being children and spend time with them. And the best way to slow things down was to take them on the road and experience new things on a regular basis. That way, you're not just getting into the same old routine where you're doing the same thing every day, and you wake up and it's 5 years from now and you don't know where the time went. So he intentionally took his family on this trip to build those memories and to really cherish that time. So the question I asked myself, and I'll leave you with as well, is how can you do some of the same? Not necessarily take your family on on a year-long road trip, but how can you more intentionally spend your time and your experiences with people that matter in your life?
7.
Episode number 7 was a lot of fun for me. I got the opportunity to sit down with a friend of mine, Ben Haggerty. At that point in time, he was getting ready to kick off his podcast, Black with No Cream, and he'd been out in LA for about 2 years working with people like Macklemore, Lil Dicky, Schoolboy Q, and just to name a few people. And from there, he just got done with a world tour with Beyonce and Jay-Z as their, I believe it was their photographer, but I could be wrong. So this episode was really cool. Ben shares a lot of his experiences, how he struggled in school and, a lot of the choices that he made throughout life to help him to get where he is today and where he's going to be in the future. And so the biggest takeaway for me was believe in yourself, work hard, and keep going no matter what happens. Take time to give back and be willing to work with everyone who needs it. So that last part, where everyone who needs it, I mean, an example would be Ben has people who are striving to be videographers or photographers reach out to him all the time, and he's always willing to give back and give them the time of day and give them advice. And I think that's one reason why he's had such a successful career so far. And I'm looking forward to really seeing where he goes in the future. I think that the sky's the limit for this guy, and he's gonna keep doing amazing things and contributing to his online community, Black with No Cream, which is a community of creators. So if you are a creator, head over to Facebook and join the Black with No Cream community and say hello. So the question that I'm asking myself after listening to this episode is, how can I give back more? How can I contribute more to people who are maybe a few years behind where I'm at, or are striving to start a podcast, or are striving to build successful habits, or habits that will lead them to the future that they want to have? And that's the question I would leave you with as well, is how can you give back more? How can you contribute to people who could use your guidance more? How can you be the type of person that you needed 3 or 5 or 10 years ago? Think about that as we jump to episode number 8.
8.
On episode number 8, I had a friend and fellow community member in the startup world, Ben McDougall, also known as the Benovator on Twitter. So Ben and I sat down. This was the first in-person interview that I did, so it was interesting going back and listening to it. I feel like I've definitely come a long way looking at Ben and I's interview and then comparing it to the interview I just did with David Gold. So Ben shares, the value of community and why it's important to participate regularly. This really builds off of episode number 7, where it's like, how can you give back more? So the question I'm asking myself is not just on an individual level, but is there a way as a community that I could be contributing more? And that's what I would ask you to ask yourself, is what types of communities are around you that you can participate in? You never know what type of interactions or introductions or opportunities might come out of it. So give yourself the opportunity to participate with people just like you around you, and you never know what you're going to get.
9.
So episode number 9 was a really fun one for me. I had guest Paul Singh on. He's an investor with a venture firm or angel firm called Results Junkies with his fiance Dana Duncan. So Paul came on the show and really started sharing his experiences about how he became the investor that he is today. And really it turned into more than just that. It was really interesting to me how he shared the importance of recency of experience versus how much experience you have, and how important it is to have how it's important that you have done something recently versus you've done it for the last 10 years. So the biggest takeaway I had from this episode was why it's so important to keep trying a ton of stuff to figure out what works. you kind of have to detach your ego or your self-worth or your feelings from testing things out. It's really the only way that you're going to figure out what works for you. Now, he was discussing this in regards to startups, but you can also apply this to other areas as well. Maybe it's fitness. Maybe it's trying to become a musician. Maybe it's traveling. It's not always going to be a one-size-fits-all, and just because something doesn't work for you in that specific scenario, it doesn't change your worth as a person. I mean, if people knew how many things I've tried and failed at, it's pretty bad. That's why I always get kind of rubbed the wrong way when people are like, oh yeah, he tried that thing and it didn't work. What an idiot. I'm like, hey, like I've probably failed just as many or more times than the person that you're talking about. So try not to judge too harshly. Try not to judge other people too harshly for their attempts or their failures, because, going back to the episode with Michael Carraway, you never know what they went through. You never know what happens truly unless you've walked in their shoes. So, just try to be kind and understanding and encourage them the next time they go to bat.
10.
Episode number 10 is with John Bacher from Denver. He's an expert on emotional intelligence, and I didn't even know what that meant until I had John on the show, but it ended up being a great episode. We talk a lot about the power of communication, and there was one thing he said to me that stood out and struck me, just hit me right in the face, and that was, imagine that you're in a coffee shop and you see like a couple sitting there, and this is not verbatim, but imagine you've seen that couple sitting there and they're early on in their relationship and they're really in love. Like, you can tell by the way that they are acting or behaving or communicating toward each other. And imagine that if you're 10 years into your marriage and you start treating your significant other like that couple that has just fallen in love, what type of impact do you think that would have on your relationship? Now, I think the reason that this struck me so much is because if you think about that in many different contexts, let's just use relationships as an example. When you're in that honeymoon phase, or you're in that phase where this person can do no wrong in your eyes, they are amazing, they're like this perfect person, you haven't seen their flaws, or if you have, you're looking through rose-colored glasses, so the red flags just look like flags. And, think about how you behave in that context, and then apply it to your relationship later on down the road. What type of impact do you think that would have? So think about that in other situations, like a business relationship, networking. How can you behave in a way that communicates your intention specifically? Like think about the successful business relationships that you've had and how those interactions take place. Can you replicate that when you're meeting new people so it's easier for you to build those new relationships? Something to think about. Just think about that the next time you're interacting with someone and you want a specific outcome. Think about how you've gotten it in the past and how those interactions took place, and see if you can replicate them.
11.
Episode number 11 was with my now friend Dara Brustein, and we discuss, her writing experiences, and specifically how she designs her life to achieve the goals and the outcomes that she wants to. So this has been a really good a really good lesson for me on the effects of like relationship building. Like, I didn't know Dara before this episode at all, and from there she came back and returns in a later episode with another guest. She introduced me to an amazing guest, Tommy Breedlove, and I eventually was able to speak at her Life Design Summit. So Dara really practices what she preaches when she talks about building relationships as well. She's probably one of the best at building and maintaining relationships than almost anyone I've ever met, and it's amazing to watch. So this episode was a lot of fun. I could tell that, I was still getting my feet wet a little bit with interviewing. So to anybody who listens to it, just be kind to my growing pains as an interviewer. My biggest takeaway from this episode was you don't have to do things a specific way. You can design your life and your business to fit the outcome that you desire. So if you think about, like, if I look at how I've built my life currently, 2 years ago I was in Boulder, Colorado, and I decided that whatever I did, I wanted to be able to travel full-time for an extended period of time. And every decision I have made from there has helped me to either work towards that goal, so learning how to sell things online, learning about e-commerce, learning about online marketing, podcasting, meeting other people who have traveled, asking them how they did it. That's kind of what life design is. It's like if you want to be able to go hiking every day, it's like designing your life in a way where you can live somewhere where you have access to trails and the time to go hike, right? So think about this for your life. What outcome do you want next year, 3 years, a month from now? And then how can you reverse engineer it to get to where you want to go?
12.
Episode number 12 is with U.S. Marine Corps veteran and military cost cutters CEO, Aaron Serrano. So I ran into Aaron at this event in Lincoln, and I just chatted with him for a few minutes, and I was like, man, I got to get this guy on the show. He's got so much experience from the military, so many leadership lessons learned there, and then he's taken it and applied it to running his own business. We talk a lot about what lessons he learned in the military that have now applied to his time as a business CEO. So the biggest takeaway I had from this episode is why you have to go through failure to improve, and leading by example, right? So if you are going to ask other people to do things, if you're going to behave in a certain way, make sure that you are acting in the way that you are requesting from other people. He shared a very specific story where there was a CEO that treated him extremely poorly, did not lead by example, and exhibited poor leadership. So when he was then moved into a leadership role himself, he basically took on the mantle of showing other people how he'd like for them to behave by leading and behaving in that way. Ask yourself, if you're going to ask anybody on your team or anybody you're working with to do something or behave in a particular way, are you exhibiting that behavior yourself? And if you're not, how can you get to that level so you're leading by example instead of just kind of, handing down orders without following them yourself?
13.
Episode number 13 was with Olympic legend Dan Gable. So this was an interesting interview for me. I got a random phone call from Dan after I submitted an email or a contact us box on his website, and put my phone number in, and he just gave me a call and invited me to his home to do the interview. So I sat down with him, and this guy is just on a completely another level when it comes to competition, right? Because he won, he only lost like one Olympic match, one match his entire college career, and then he went to the Olympics, and he didn't give up a single point in wrestling, right? Like, that's insane to me. You're wrestling the best people in the world and not giving up a single point. Then he went on to coach, and he led the Iowa Hawkeyes wrestling team to somewhere, it's over 12 national titles. So, and then he coached tons of Olympic wrestlers as well. So just a crazy successful competitive career. He also has some interesting, he has an interesting background it's full of tragedy. As a kid, his sister was raped and murdered, and it really fell on him to keep his family together. I didn't know about this story until I interviewed Dan, so it really caught me off guard. But that leads me to what I learned from Dan in this episode, and that was, no matter what the challenges are, you have a choice to get through them and how you get through them. You can You can either let them, turn you into like you can let them hold you back, you can let them stop you, you can let them get you off their path, or you can use them to push you farther than you ever could have gotten before. So everybody has their own, let's just say, shit that they have to go through, and it's a matter of how you handle it that will define you. Dan's is probably worse than most of ours, but he's a shining example of what you can do when bad things happen in your life.
14.
Episode 14 was with Colin Wright. He's an author, and he's been traveling the world full time for 8 years, maybe 9 years now, and he's currently in the middle of a U.S. tour. So if you listen to the episode and you feel like hearing Colin speak in person, just Google his name and check out the tour schedule, and you should be able to find him somewhere near you. My biggest takeaway from this episode with Colin is we talked about so many things. We talked about writing, traveling, and relationships. And for me, the biggest takeaway, though, was the value of an expiration date. So he was discussing when he would move to a new city how he would have to have a conversation with them that he was probably not going to be living in that city within 3 months. So if they were okay with that, then they should then that's cool. He was okay with it. But if they weren't, then they should go their separate ways now. And the lesson was that when there was that expiration date of him leaving, that the value of the relationship was even better, even higher. So what that meant was they would spend more of their time like doing meaningful things, spending their time on like in each other's company, doing things instead of sitting next to each other, mindlessly scrolling on Facebook, mindlessly watching television, those types of things. So the question I'm asking myself is, how can I approach more of my relationships like this, whether that's with family or friends or a significant other? How can I treat that relationship as it has an expiration date? So that way I value that time even more. And I would leave that challenge to you as well. Ask yourself, how can you treat this current relationship that you have like it has an expiration date, and see what type of impact that it has on your approach.
15.
Episode number 15 was with the musician Moods, aka Nick Luberson, and he's just a really interesting guy. He's a DJ out of the Netherlands, out of Rotterdam, and we just had a very serendipitous way of meeting. I was asked to give a stranger a ride to the airport, and it turned out to be him. We had a great conversation, and I invited him on the show sometime later. He actually ended up contributing a lot of the music to the show. So, thanks again, Nick, for contributing and sending over those beats. So my big takeaway from this episode was how it took him 10 years of practice and putting together beats to become basically an overnight success. And, how he focused on the process of creating music versus the outcome, and how it eventually has led to him, having millions of views on Spotify and hundreds of thousands of regular listeners. So think about that when it comes to your own life, and how you should take your eye off of the outcome, whatever that is, and focus on how you can make the process of practice, the process of creating, how you can fine-tune that in the best way possible, how you can make your process rock solid so the outcome will take care of itself. When I think about creating a podcast, it's like every single week going back and listening to the episode the week before, almost like a quarterback looking at game tape, trying to figure out where the holes are, how I could do better, which part of production needs to be improved, what type of questions do I wish I would have asked, focusing on that process and improving the marketing, but not really paying attention to what my download numbers are. Like, I get asked a lot what my download numbers are, and I try not to even look. And I don't really care. I don't really want to look. I know that they're increasing. I have a general idea of where they are, but to me, it's more about the process of trying to build the best podcast every single week. So How can you think about it in your own life, and how can you do the same?
16.
Next up is episode 16 with Be Leaderly's Joe Miller. Joe is a professional speaker and just an all-around just a rock star from born and raised in Australia. She's just an amazing person with a ton of life experience. She travels all the time. Just really a big fan of Joe. So the big takeaway I had from the interview with Joe was that how important it is to put yourself out there, and how you really need to find your niche. This is something I'm not the strongest in. It's something I'm working on. But how can you create your own niche, and how can you own it? What that means is, I like to use the restaurant example. If you open a restaurant, are you just opening a sports bar? Or are you going to open something that's like a Green Bay Packers themed sports bar? So instead of just having a cheeseburger, you have like the Brett Favre burger, or something along those lines. How can you make yourself a niche, and then how can you own it?
17.
Number 17 is with Andy Anderson, the mountain climber and just all-around athletic extraordinaire. Between our interview and this episode, Andy has ran his Leadman, which is like a Iron Man on steroids, and I think he even beat Lance Armstrong in the Leadman. So that's pretty crazy. I really enjoyed this conversation with him. It was a really nice surprise, like how the information that he shared on, my big takeaway as well, which was the importance of learning to iterate. Like, it's an iterative process. You're going to suck at first, whether it's mountain climbing, running, exercising, learning to sail. You just have to accept the fact that you're going to be bad at the beginning. Like, it's going to be hard, but it's going to get easier, and you have to be willing to go through those steps in order to be able to climb the mountain, or run, bike, swim, whatever else is involved in the Leadman. So the sooner you accept that, the sooner you will give yourself the opportunity to do something extraordinary.
18.
Number 18 was with my guy, Tommy Breedlove from Choose Goodness. So he shares a lot of his experiences in the corporate world and what led him to starting his new company, Choose Goodness, and his life lessons, which were like from being in prison when he was a young adult, all the way up to being a corporate executive, to now helping other people to make the conscious decisions to choose goodness in their lives. So the biggest takeaway I had from Tommy was you need to be able to take time to pull back and reflect. Why, and understand why it's so important to take time for yourself, and to use the term I've used a bunch of times here in the last minute, is to choose goodness. Like, how can you treat your team better? How can you treat your team in a way that is positive and promotes growth? And think about that with yourself too. Like, how can you take the time that you need to pull back and reflect? What types of things do you need to make time or space for in your life? Whether that's going on a bike ride, spending time with a significant other. I mean, hell, maybe it's taking an hour once a week just to play a game of Madden on the PS4, whatever it is that floats your boat. How can you make time for that thing?
19.
Episode 19 was with longtime friend and professional speaker, Travis Lloyd. Travis does a lot of work with foster kids, and I really applaud him for the inspiration and the guidance that he gives people and kids that are facing a scenario that a lot of us don't have any experience with or can't even relate to. So in this episode, Travis talks about his experience becoming a professional speaker, and then what it's been like when he's had adversity come up in his life, or there was a specific situation where he was, like booed off stage, and he was extremely embarrassed, but he picked himself back up and went out there and did it again. So the lesson that I learned from this episode was how difficult it can be to overcome rejection, but why it is so important that you do so. How can you take a look at something in your life that has been maybe considered some form of rejection or an obstacle, and how can you start working on it today to move past it?
20.
Episode number 20 was with a good friend, Scotty Russell. Scotty's an illustrative lettering artist and host of the Perspective podcast, which, if you're a creative and you're looking for someone who can relate to all of the challenges that you face as a creative artist in today's Instagram and instant gratification world, you're going to want to check out Scotty's show. So in this episode, we talk about doing the shit that scares you, and really, my biggest takeaway is that if something scares you, you should just do it. And you just need to get started. Like, take small steps. Just do something, though, to move yourself towards that goal. And it's well, as long as it's not something that's going to hurt someone or hurt yourself, maybe it's scary for a reason. But if it's something like, creating your first drawing, creating your first podcast episode, starting your first startup, writing a song, writing a poem, whatever it is that you're afraid of, just do it and start putting yourself out there. It's gonna, we've talked about this a bunch of times. It's gonna suck at first. It's not gonna be fun. It's gonna be embarrassing when you look back. But if you don't do that, if you do not put yourself out there and don't feel embarrassed later on, then you'll never hit those goals that you want to achieve. You'll never become that artist or musician. So how can you get started doing something that scares you today? What's one thing you could do today? Is it writing just one sentence of a poem and posting it on Instagram? Is it writing that guitar riff and throwing it up on Facebook or sending it to a few friends? Whatever it is, take some time and get it done today.
21.
Next up is episode 21 with artofed.com's Derek Balsley. This was a fun interview. Derek invited me up to his office over in Osage, and I got to sit down with him to talk about growing a business. My biggest takeaway from this episode is that you really just need to start small and just build from there. Like, they started their company as a blog, and now it's an accredited online university, right? So that's awesome. Like, that's a great story, from starting somewhere small, building something people want, and then working your way up from there. How can you start on something small today? Whether that's starting a blog around your favorite hobby, or starting a YouTube channel around something that you like to talk about, or start a vlog. What is something small that you can get started on right now that will potentially lead you to the future that you want to have?
22.
In episode 22, I had the opportunity to sit down with sumo.com's head sumo, Noah Kagan. You might have seen Noah on the Tim Ferriss show or a lot of other podcasts, or on his YouTube channel talking about different marketing strategies. Noah's a pretty well-known guy in the online marketing world. So I really enjoyed talking with him. He even set up a nice little challenge for me about like do something so big and important from Iowa that I won't be able to answer his emails anymore. So thanks for throwing down the gauntlet, Noah, and I'm going to do the best that I can. My biggest takeaway from the episode was that you really just need to get started selling and prioritize your work based on what the market responds to. If you are working towards building a product and you're not testing with the market on a regular basis, then you're really missing out. You could be spending a lot of time building something that no one gives a shit about at all. And if that's the case, you can't get that time back. So invest your time in those experiments, and don't get stuck in evaluation mode. Just get started selling something. So if you have artwork, a startup, a blog, an email list, how can you sit down today and brainstorm a way to sell them something, to monetize whatever it is that you're doing? Like, how can you sell someone one of your drawings? I cannot tell you how good it will feel when you go to someone and you sell them one of your product. It's an amazing feeling, and it'll get you out of that stuck feeling that you have right now. It's so important. And the more times you do it, the easier it'll get. The first time you'll probably have some butterflies in your stomach, you'll be a little bit nervous, but I promise you it gets easier.
23.
Episode number 23 was with sales consultant Jesse Shepard out of Denver, Colorado. I was introduced to Jesse through Michael Caraway. So big shout out to Michael for introducing me to Jesse. It was such an interesting dude to talk to because he's balancing, his family, a job, and starting a business and going to school. And he really talked a lot about prioritizing, right? And one of the things that he said has made him so successful, other than prioritizing what's most important in life, is my biggest takeaway, which was, your first job as a salesperson is not to sell. It's to help. It's to help your potential customer or friend or whoever solve a problem, right? It's like, how can you help them? Your job is not to convince them that they have a problem and convince them to buy your product. Your job is to help them with a problem that they already have and to give them a solution. Maybe it's not your product. Maybe it's just giving them a guide or just some advice. But, that's where it starts. You build a relationship with them, and it grows into them becoming one of your paying customers by you helping them out. So think about that next time you approach someone. If you're in a sales position, how can you help them versus how can you convince them to buy your widget?
24.
Episode number 24 was with artist Whitney Freya. So this was really cool. I hadn't interviewed a painter before, so it was awesome having Whitney's perspective as a interviewee on the show. So the biggest takeaway that I had in talking with Whitney was how she described the process of having people paint in front of her, and then how their mental blocks and mental barriers would come out in a more in an easier to identify way when they were painting versus when they were doing their craft. So it was an interesting lesson because it's like, you're working on your business or a podcast or whatever, and it's like you have these blocks, right? Like you have these challenges in your way, but they're really hard to identify when you're working every day on this thing. So when you take a step back and maybe apply that to painting, then all of a sudden those same mental blocks come out like, oh, it's not good enough. It's not ready. Oh, it's not perfect. I can't show anyone it yet. Which maybe are the same things that you're saying about your business, your other thing that you have over here, your songs, your poems, your writings, your book, whatever it is. So how can you find a creative outlet to identify whatever mental roadblocks are holding you back?
25.
I had Handrails Matt Weingarten on the show. Matt is a UX guru and just a really brilliant guy when it comes to understanding the customer journey from finding about your product all the way to purchasing it and using it afterwards. My biggest takeaway from this episode is, resiliency, right? Like, and what you do with the data that you get. Like, sometimes you don't have complete control over everything that happens. And you don't have complete control over like how your experiments go, right? You are just following the process. So, and then it's also taking into consideration where the information that you're getting is coming from. Is it coming from somebody who is going to be using your product, or is it coming from just like a random bystander that looked at your product and has some complaints about it? And then what are you doing with that information? Are you taking their suggestions for what you should do with it? Or are you being the expert and then applying your knowledge and experience to creating a solution to whatever their challenge or problem is? So how can you take this information, this thought process, right? Like, who's giving you the information and apply it to other areas of your life, right? Like who's telling you should be eating your diet this way? Is it someone who has an excellent physique that you would like to mimic, or is it someone that doesn't really have that physique that you desire? So where's your information coming from? And is it coming from a source that you trust and want to use? Or should you maybe just not listen and try to find someone else who has that experience?
26.
With Brian Alvey from Clipisode. So it was really awesome to have Brian on the show. He actually made an appearance over at EntreFest this year, so it was really good to meet him and hang out in person. So Brian really shares a lot of his personal experiences in startups and how sometimes things aren't always perfect and sometimes things are really, really hard. So my biggest takeaway is, sometimes things don't go the way you want them to. Short term, long term, doesn't matter. But it's really like how you handle it. Do you keep going? Do you back off? How are you going to handle the stress that comes up with running a startup or a business or training for an athletic event? Things aren't always going to go perfect. So how are you going to handle things? How are you going to roll with the punches, right? So think about that. Think about what challenges you could be facing right now. Maybe take some time, go for a walk, write down, how can I roll with the punches a little bit better, and maybe get kind of a game plan for the next time. Maybe I hit a dip or run into a wall or whatever term that you want to use. So take some time and think about that.
27.
On episode 27, I had my guys Scat Dix and Adrian Brambila on the show to talk about side hustles, and I love these guys. They're so much fun to talk with. There's going to be some individual episodes coming out with those two in the future, so I'm hoping that you get the opportunity to check those out. My biggest takeaway from this episode was how trying new things in different areas can kind of cross over to other areas of your life. Like what's it like to be a dancer and then also run an e-commerce store? What's it like to be a jiu-jitsu practitioner but also run a digital marketing business? What's it like to do improv, and how does that affect all these other areas, right? So I know in the business world, a lot of people run around saying like, just focus on your business, kill yourself for it, put all of your time into it, sacrifice everything else, sacrifice your hobbies. But these two guys have seen high levels of success in their life, and they are sitting here telling us that it doesn't have to be that way, and it's actually even more beneficial for you and your business or whatever it is to have other outlets, right? Other things that you do that you are a practitioner of. I know Scott hates this word, but becoming more of a Renaissance man than like a one-trick pony. Because you never know how, taking a jiu-jitsu lesson or learning a different dance style or taking improv classes will affect the other areas of your life. So think about how you can maybe pick up one of your old hobbies or pick up a new hobby and get started with that today.
28.
On episode 28, I had the opportunity to sit down with the founders of Marry My City, Caitlin Byers and Talis Stroop. And, it was a lot of fun chatting with them about their experiences. And it just so happened that it also coincided with the episode with Adrian and Scott about, side hustles and hobbies and how they affect your main hustle or your main business. So my biggest takeaway from the conversation with Caitlin and Talis was we all get comfortable in our daily lives. Like we all get comfortable doing like the daily grind, right? But it's really important that we break out of that comfort and try new things, push ourselves, get out of push our boundaries a little bit. Try something that you're not maybe 100% comfortable with. I remember the first time I went to a salsa night. I'm not an amazing salsa dancer now, but I had no idea what I was doing. I was completely in over my head, but I had an amazing time, and it was scary, but it inspired me to then start taking salsa lessons for about a year, and I'm a much more accomplished salsa dancer now, and I've made many friends in the salsa circle, and that also led me to learning how to swing dance. And I just went to 5 weeks of swing dance lessons here in the Czech Republic, and went to a event called I think it was like a weekend in Czech Republic or something like that, and I took shag dancing lessons and went to a huge event there and met people from all over the world. So you never know, like, when you push out of your comfort zone one time, where it could possibly lead you. So sit down and ask yourself today, like, what's something that you'd love to try, but maybe is a little bit outside of your current reach or current comfort zone, and how can you get started, like taking one step towards it today? Maybe it's just watching a YouTube tutorial on how to do a Fortnite dance. Whatever it is, I challenge you to give it a shot today and get started.
29.
Episode 29, I have my friends Peter Awid and Tommy Breedlove back on the show to talk about living with intention. And my big takeaway from this episode, I mean, these two guys just really jived really well together, is that life can kick you in the face, but it's really all about perspective and staying grateful. Just be grateful. You know, just start with like the smallest thing. Like, are you able to get out of bed today? There you go. You have one thing to be grateful for. Do you have your health? Do you have a job? Do you have a place to live? Do you have drinkable water? I mean, these are all things that we probably take for granted. I know I do sometimes, especially when I'm having a rough day. But, you know, it always pays off to take a second and think about all the positive things going on in your life. So maybe one thing you could do after listening to this episode is take a second to jot down a few things in a notebook that you're grateful for, even if you just have to start with the fact that you're able to write. So that's my challenge for you.
30.
Episode number 30 with that speaker guy, Corey Poirier. So he shares a lot of his experience on how he became a professional speaker. And the big takeaway I had from this episode was that there is a certain level of embarrassment or pain that he had to go through to becoming a professional speaker. And that's the case with pretty much anything you want to be a professional. And we've talked about this probably a dozen times now. So hopefully I'm really hitting the message home. You have to be willing to be bad, to suck, to be embarrassed, to be like me, just as bad as I was when I first started trying to salsa dance. Can you imagine a skinny, pale, nerdy white guy trying to move his hips fluidly to salsa music? So trust me, folks, if I can embarrass myself like that, you can handle whatever level of embarrassment you're looking at. So get out there, give something a shot today. Be cool with being embarrassed. Have a nice laugh at your own expense. Get up and try again.
31.
Episode number 31. So we have Tommy Breedlove and Dara Burstein back on the show again, talking about lifestyle design. And, these two actually have known each other for quite some time. So there's a lot of great chemistry on this episode. And I know I learned a lot just from reviewing it again on how I can do a little bit better being more conscious and intentional about the decisions I make when it comes to designing my life. So my big takeaway from this episode is that thinking about where your journey is taking you and understanding why you want to go there. So a lot of people maybe have some goals of, I want to be at this position in this company, or I want to be in this good a shape at this point in time. But really, if you've taken a step back and asked yourself why you want to end up there, what is causing you to push for that goal? And is it something that when you get there, you're actually going to be happy with it? So maybe when you take a walk today, as I've said a few times in this episode, take a walk, and you think about this question, jot it down. Journaling is so, so important. It really helps you to get your thoughts on paper and allow you to take a look at them in another medium, so you can really be critical or analyze them and ask yourself if you're going in the right direction and why.
33.
All right, we have a double header again for episode number 33. We have Peter Awid and Colin Wright talking about the formula for long-term travel. So these guys have just as much or more experience than any two people that I've met when it comes to traveling long-term. And their journeys have taken them in two different forms. Peter with the family, Colin doing solo travel. And it was a really, really interesting episode because you just got an interesting perspective on how to pull off long-term travel and why you should do it, and how different people have different thresholds for the level of risk or uncertainty that they're willing to face. So my big takeaway on this episode was that you should understand your comfort level and then design backwards from there. So whether you're traveling, building a business, starting a side hustle, you should understand that not everyone is going to have the same threshold for comfort. And you need to make sure and build based on what you're comfortable with versus what other people tell you you should be. So for me, traveling, like I don't mind waiting until I'm boots on the ground in a new city to book a place to stay for that night. I don't mind booking a flight last minute. I know some people cannot handle that. They need to have that planned out a month ahead of time with an agenda printed off. That's just how they had to do it. I'm a little different. So make sure and when you're making your next plan for where you'd like to go, whether it's traveling, building a business, side hustle, creative project, whatever, make sure you're building from your comfort level, not the comfort level that other people are putting onto you.
34.
All right, and we are to episode number 34. So I had originally invited Luke on to talk about biohacking, but we ended up spending like an hour and a half talking about how he got into podcasting and his podcasting experiences as he had just recently hit 1 million downloads, which is an awesome accomplishment, and I'm sure he's getting close to his 2 million or 3 million mark at this point. So my big takeaway from this episode was the importance of approaching brands or companies early to monetize your show. So his message was that, like, you might not have the audience yet, or you might not have the following yet in order to book like a big sponsorship deal. But if you can at least get started early in building those relationships and starting to figure out what they require from you in order to get to that level of a sustainable business through marketing or through advertising on your podcast, it's going to set you up for a successful future relationship with them. So I would say that a big lesson that I learned from that is just that sometimes you're ready sooner than you think, or sometimes you just need to try before you feel like you're ready to find out where you're at and what you're going to need to do in the future. What's that roadmap look like? Maybe you don't have any idea what these podcast advertisers are going to be asking you, or your client, or your book publisher, or whoever. You don't know until you ask. So see if you can get out there and talk to these people and find out what they're going to need from you. You might be a lot closer than you think.
35.
All right, so we're to episode number 35 with Dr. John McGraw. John is a hypnotherapist, which I didn't even know what that was until he came on the show. And we dived into, what is hypnotherapy? How does it work? And my big takeaway from this episode was that everybody has stuff, right? Things that they have to deal with, challenges, whether it's mental blocks, whatever it is. But it's really up to you how you decide to handle those. And then there's specific times when you should be handling them versus not. Like when you're really down and struggling, you shouldn't be sitting down like trying to write out new goals and trying to figure out how you're going to accomplish them. There's going to be times where you feel very inspired, and that's when you should really be investing your time into pushing forward and setting those new goals and taking action towards them. So my challenge for you is to ask yourself, what mindset are you in? Are you in like the growth mindset where you are capable of moving forward, taking action towards your goals? Or are you right now kind of struggling and a little bit down and you need to kind of like bring yourself back up a bit? A few ways I kind of bring myself out of that funk is to go on walks, exercise, take ice cold showers, write for a while. Any of those things to really just get me out of my head. So whatever you got to do to get you moving in the right direction into that growth mindset and action mindset, take some time and do that today.
36.
On episode 36, I had the opportunity to sit down with Etch-a-Sketch artist Tim Gallenbeck and discuss how he gets into his creative zone using yoga, meditation, any type of stress-relieving techniques. So my big takeaway was that before you start creating, you need to really relieve yourself of like the more intense versions of stress, which is, like you just are so tense, like your neck hurts or your shoulders hurt or something because you're so stressed out. So developing a daily practice of meditation and yoga has really helped me to feel good, feel confident, feel more creative, and really feel like I'm able to. I do it in the morning, so it helps me feel like my day has started off really well, and I'm making a lot of progress before I even leave the house. So if you haven't tried it, check out like the Breathe app or Headspace app. I also do yoga with Adriene on YouTube. It's pretty easy. You just throw it on, and then you just follow the instructions that she gives you. She's pretty. There's some that are pretty laid back for beginners. So if that sounds like something that you feel like would be helpful, definitely Yoga by Adriene, the Breathe app, or Headspace app.
37.
Episode 37 was another interesting one for me because I had the opportunity to interview Brian Rutenberg. He's a American abstract artist who's I didn't get his paintings at first, but thanks to my friend Laura Gansmer for explaining what he was actually painting. And once I got it, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing! Like he's an excellent painter. So I enjoyed the interview with him quite a bit. I found it to be really fascinating, and my big takeaway from him was the importance of a routine in the creative process. So recently, in the last episode, I was telling you about with Tim talking about getting like a meditation and yoga routine into the morning. So Brian builds on like that type of thing, not necessarily yoga and meditation, but having that creative process, like getting a cup of coffee, sitting down at your favorite creative spot, having your easel and paintbrush, right? So having almost like like in golf they call it like a pre-shot routine. So like building your pre-shot routine for your creative process. So maybe the next time you sit down to write or to paint or to create music, whatever it is, pay attention to what your process is and see if there's a way that maybe you could build a routine around it. So even when you don't quite feel like it, you can start that routine and then get your mind into that creative mode to allow you to create your best work.
38.
Episode number 38 was with Girls Gone Strong, Jen Comis. Jen has an amazing business that she's built with helping women be, more confident as they start their fitness journeys. And the big takeaways I had were, she was talking about how removing negative influences off of social media, things that, impact you in a negative light, get that like negative thought process going, how to get rid of that. And then, I'm thinking about how other people can apply that just to their lives in general. Like, you don't have to be on a fitness journey to be wanting to remove negative things from your life. So maybe take a self-reflection moment and notice when maybe it's interactions with certain people on social media, certain websites you go to, certain things that you do that don't make you feel that good, and then figure out if there's a way to remove them from your life. They don't have to be there. You don't have to give them that power or control over your attitude or your future. So what's one thing you could remove from your life today?
39.
So in episode 39, I had the opportunity to sit down with former rocket scientist Stephanie Osborne. I was totally blown away by this interview. I was not expecting, I don't really know what I expected, but Stephanie was just an amazing guest, and she shared like when she was younger about when she traveled a lot and how she saw the world and experienced things, and then, her career as a rocket scientist. And it was just an amazing interview. And my big takeaway was, other than hearing her journey and recommendations for taking life on, was our conversation that we had about overcoming a tragedy, because one of her friends had died on the Challenger, and it took her a long time to move past that and to heal from that. So I think that the lesson that I learned from that conversation was just bad things are going to happen, right? And you can let them, for lack of a better term, like destroy you, tear you down, or you can allow them to move you closer to where you want to be, or to move you forward. There's been times where I've lost people in my life, and it's really hard. It sucks. It's not fun. It's and you need to take time to heal. But at the same time, it also made me realize like how precious life is and how quickly it can change. You can be here one day and gone the next. So why don't you just go for whatever the hell it is that you want? Like you don't know what's going to happen in the future. You don't know if 5 years down the road you'll be able to do it or not, right? So what are you waiting for? Like I don't know. There's not many people I know that aren't capable of pursuing whatever dream or job or art or whatever it is that they want to accomplish. It's just that I think they feel like they have so much time to get there, but in reality, we don't know. So think about that the next time you decide to put something off. It's what's the Stoic saying? It's like memento mori. I think it's like we could die at any moment. So just think about that. What do you want to be doing now if you knew that you only had a limited amount of time left?
40.
On this episode, number 40, I got the opportunity to interview Anthony D'Amato. And man, this was a fun one. I had recently seen him in concert in Iowa for a fundraiser for Burmese refugees. And he's just a really, really awesome guy. So one of the big takeaways I had from the conversation, which ranged from his process for creating music to the big takeaway for me is like the relatability in each song. Like there's a song, If It Don't Work Out, and it's about like a couple that's living together, and when they break up, having to split their things up. If you have ever been through that, it is not much fun whatsoever. It's painful, it sucks, and it's his song really hits it on the head, right? So it's extremely relatable. So we talk about how it's important to whatever it is that you're creating, for it to be relatable to your audience or your listener, instead of it just being like generic. How can you make whatever it is that you're creating, make it relatable to another party, to whoever's going to be consuming it? Think about that when you write, like who's going to be reading it? How can you make it relatable to them? How can you create for an audience of one?
41.
On episode 41, I had the opportunity to interview Barry McDonough. So Barry is one of the best-selling authors of the book Daring, Daring, to Face Your Anxiety. And man, this was fascinating because we talk about like the causes of anxiety. And really, like moving to my biggest lesson I learned was using anxiety as a compass. Like when you feel that anxiety building up, like you have that's like where you should be going. You should be using that as almost like a map. And he breaks down a lot of steps on how to work through this, not just go from 0 to 100 jumping out of an airplane, but how you can really work towards using your anxiety as that compass and not letting it cripple you and keep you at home. So what's something that you've been afraid of or felt like you had anxiety around? And how can you take one step closer to that today? Let's say you want to meet people at a networking event. Instead of not meeting people at a networking event, but let's say you want to get a mentor, right? So you want to get a mentor. You go to a networking event. Instead of setting the goal as, I need to go find a mentor today, can you just go say hi to one person? Just a baby step, right? So what can you do today? What baby step can you take today in the right direction?
42.
On episode 42, I had the opportunity to sit down with a good friend of mine, Kat Cantrell. So Kat is a burlesque dance instructor and the owner of Vitality Fitness. So she is just a fascinating lady. And we really talk a lot about her process of working with women to empower them, to help them bounce back. Because she works with a lot of women who are going through some type of midlife crisis or have lost their path. So like the big takeaway for me was like how to use other outlets, right? Other outlets that are unorthodox, such as burlesque, to really to get your groove back, right? To get your swagger back, whatever terminology you want to use. So think about that. It's same thing with like Adrian and Scott's episode and Talis and Caitlin's. How can you use something other than your craft to help you get your confidence back, or get your creativity flowing? Think through that as you work through this next week, and think about what, like in an ideal world, what would you do for a hobby if you could do anything?
43.
Okay, so this episode was a interesting one. It was done live with my friend Josh Krakauer, who is the founder of Sculpt, which is a online marketing agency out of Iowa City. Josh and I have known each other for quite a few years, and we had a couple. I had a couple beers before this episode, so we really got deep into a few things. And my big takeaway from this, Josh has a ton of business experience, and he shared a lot of it in this episode, was why it really helps not to go into things alone, to have like some type of mentor, network, or coach or something, because you don't have all the answers and you're going to need someone to check you. So have a co-founder, have somebody there to help you out. So take a second and think about who your support network is. Do you have a co-founder? Do you have a business partner? Do you have a workout buddy? Do you have a coach? Do you have a trainer? Do you have somebody teaching you how to play guitar? Whatever it is. Like, think about that. And if you don't have someone like that, think about how you can get one. That's the challenge I'd leave you with from my lesson learned from this episode, is figure out how you can add another person to your circle to help you get to where you want to go.
44.
Okay, this next episode was one of my personal favorites with musician Ira Wolf. She drives around the country out of a van named Ruby and plays music in people's living rooms or homes, and is just an amazing artist. You got to check out some of her songs, like Sunscreen, and I'm drawing a blank on the other one. It's my Fickle Heart. That's it. So check out Sunscreen and Fickle Heart if you really want to hear some of her amazing talent. So my big takeaway from the interview with her was to be as real as possible and authentic. Some people are going to love you, and some people won't. And you have to own that. And you got to really have a thick skin. I mean, she shares a lot of the stuff that happened to her while she was on the road, like some rejection that she faced. And it's the same thing with her and Anthony have this in common, where their music it just hits home, right? Like you're listening to it and it pulls on those heartstrings because it's so relatable. It's nothing that anyone else could make. So how can you be more authentic? Like, instead of just being a writer, what type of writer are you? Instead of just being into art, what type of art? Be more specific. That's probably the best way to be more authentic, is like, I like X-Men. It's like, oh, okay, cool, everybody does. Well, Wolverine is my favorite X-Men. That's a lot more specific. Maybe not the best example in this context, but it's like, how can you take it a level deeper? That's going to make you stand out so much more and be so much more relatable. Some people are going to be like, oh yeah, I love Wolverine too. And other people are going to be like, no, dude, get out of here with that, right? So be more specific, and that'll make you more authentic, and that'll leave you with some raving fans, and some people will love you and agree, and some people won't.
45.
Episode 45 was with Dr. Brady Salcido, and we talked about the keto diet and just like health in general, man. This guy was such a great guest to talk about this subject. If you want to learn more about the keto diet or building a healthy lifestyle, check out his Instagram, check out that episode. It's a lot of good information. My big lesson learned or takeaway from this episode was he made this comment about how when he's like 80 years old, he wants to be the grandpa that's ripping gainers off the high dive, and the effects of your health on the people around you, right? Like if you're in bad health in your 70s and 80s, you're not going to enjoy your grandkids or great-grandkids as much as you could. So you're not only hurting yourself, but you're hurting the people that you care about by removing yourself from their lives. So think about that. The next health choice that you make, are you building towards a healthier future, or are you taking time away from those people that you love?
46.
All right, episode 46. I had Andre Perry on. He's the director of the famous Engler Theater in Iowa City and the producer of some just amazing world-class events. Iowa City is not a huge community, but they get some major acts and they put on some stellar shows that just deliver over and over again. So my conversation with Andre went deep on producing those events and what leads into producing successful events like that. And the biggest takeaway that I had, or lesson that I learned, was taking care of the artists, man. Like making them want to come back. Like make them, when they go talk about their experience at your venue or visiting your city, make them want to tell all their friends to go there too. So, and it's not just doing it from a selfish place, it's just because, you want to do it. Like you want them to have a good time, right? And think about that too with your customers or with people that you interact with. How can you make them want to come back and interact with you more? How can you make it a valuable experience?
47.
All right, we are to episode 47, where we talk about pitching again, and I had the opportunity to sit down with pitching phenom and author of Pitch Anything, Oren Klaff. Oren shares his formula for the perfect pitch. He talks about some of the pitfalls of bad pitches and even how he would pitch my podcast. So my big takeaway from him was you got to hit on a big idea, why it's important. You got to get people excited before you even talk about the product. How like when he talked about my podcast, he delivered it in such a way, instead of saying like, oh hey, we're gonna talk to people about habits, routines, etc., etc. He was like, the way he said it was so succinct and amazing. It was, I'm gonna butcher it a little bit, but it was, we are mining the minds of some of the most brilliant people in the world to bring you their habits, their tactics, and their routines. And we're leading the charge in this new podcast revolution where we don't care about what high school they went to. We care about how they did something and why they did it. So think about that the next time you talk about your project or your thing. How is it different and why does it matter?
48.
On episode 48, Scotty Russell makes his return visit to the show, and we talk about imposter syndrome and what it takes to get out of a funk. So my big takeaway was listening to Scotty on the things that he does to get himself out of a funk, or kind of like that weird mood when you don't feel like doing anything, and working out, writing, those types of things. So think about in your own life, what types of things can you do to help get you out of that funky mood? I know we've talked about it a bit, but I think it's so important. It keeps coming up over and over again. All these people seem to have a way that they are pulling themselves out of these poor moods or these creative funks that they're in. So think about what you can do to get out of yours and start building it into your routine today.
49.
All right, episode number 49. Got to talk to Mary Shores. She's an awesome entrepreneur and just a fascinating woman in general. And, we go all over the place, from her business experiences to overcoming obstacles and trauma and how the brain works, how she's a neuro nerd. My big takeaway from this was, she has this very simple way to make decisions. Will it cleanse you or clog you? Whether that's mentally, physically, food you're eating, activities you're doing, people you're spending time with. Will it cleanse you? Will it make you feel better? Will it help you move forward towards your goals? Or will it clog you? Is it going to slow you down? Is it going to make you physically sick? It's just a great way to think about your decision making in a way that will make it simple and make it easy for you to move through your day on a decision by decision basis and asking yourself, will it cleanse or clog you?
50.
We are to episode number 50, which brings us up to date. So this interview was with Professor David Gold from the University of Iowa. And man, this guy is awesome. We talk about lifestyle design, which we hit a ton on, and he has so much experience with this. He's helped so many students and worked with them to help accomplish their goals. So he really is an expert on the subject. And my big takeaway from this conversation was, what story do you want to tell? What story do you want yours to be? If you're going to write a book, what would your story be today? I want you to think about that moving forward from today into tomorrow. Figure out what story you want to write and write it.
This episode is brought to you by Ladyboss. Ladyboss is the first global weight loss and support community for women. Their mission is to help women lose weight while loving themselves. They help women get their confidence back, improve the overall quality of their life, and change the health of their entire family. They do this through providing the best information, products, and services possible in fitness, nutrition, and accountability. Ladyboss. Over 1,309,573 women supported and counting. To sign up for Ladyboss, head to the sponsored products page on theformulapodcast.com. Now, back to the show.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap for episode 50 part 2, where it's basically a halftime show to episode 100 to let you know like what I've learned so far, what our guests have shared, what my biggest takeaways have been. And I would absolutely love it if you reached out to me and did the same. Hit me up on Facebook at The Formula Podcast, or send me an email, trevor@theformulapodcast.com. That's a wrap for this week's show. It's been really fun going back over all these lessons and the words of advice that the guests have shared. If this has meant a lot to you, I know it's meant a lot to me to share all this with you and to sit down with all these amazing people. It would mean a lot to me if you jumped over to iTunes and left us a review, or Stitcher, or whatever app you're using that allows you to leave reviews. The more positive reviews that we have, the more listeners can find us. So shout out to you guys for being awesome and taking the time out to listen to this. And I look forward to you tuning in next time. This episode of The Formula was produced by Helix Academy, and the music was provided by the artist known as Moods. Make sure and check him out on Facebook or Spotify. That's MOODS.